My name is Michelle Holiday. I have focused on, hi, Christiane. I've focused on bringing a living systems worldview into the world for the past 25 years. It's an invitation to people to uh, adopt the intention to enable life to thrive through their work, whatever their sector, whatever their context. I've written a book called The Age of Thrivability: Vital Perspectives and Practices for a Better World. I work in a wide range of sectors and around the world. So this is part of what I'm bringing. And I'm joined by a wonderful co-host, Natalia.
Yes, hi everyone. Very nice to meet you. I'm very lucky to have found Michelle on my way. So I'm Canadian Mexican entrepreneur, CEO, and investor. So I've worn all these three hats, and throughout my journey as both a CEO and an investor, um, I stumbled upon this word regeneration and what it meant, and I started a quest of trying to understand what it means in our work to be regenerative. How do you do that? And so I studied a master's in regenerative economics. And there's very few people working on this field in Canada yet, and Michelle is one of them. So we've found each other, and so we're really happy to continue to learn and practice what it means in our context.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I'm happy to have found you too, Natalia. So we're offering this workshop for lots of reasons. One is that we keep hearing from people, where do I start? I'm in. I want to make this my intention to contribute to cultivate a more thrivable world, but where do I start?
Yeah.
So we wanted to share one answer to that. It's also a response to what we hear and what we feel often or have felt ourselves. We've been in many conversations where the conversation is really business as usual, and we can feel that there's more possible, there's more potential, and it's kind of an ache. And we don't know how to speak up. If only we could find the right words to help others see more of the possibility. So it's a response also to that yearning and those moments. To be clear, there aren't exactly simple and magic regenerative words. We can imagine in order to get to why this matters, why this work matters, if only we had magic, simple words. There aren't shortcuts, there aren't straight lines, but there are starting points and there are acupuncture points. There are things we can do to open the door to create the conditions for more to become possible. And as we do an exercise like this where we imagine if we could skip straight to the outcome, this is the clue to why this exercise really matters to us and to the world. And to us, it's about helping create the conditions for more shared understanding, more engagement, and those are things that lead to more regenerative impact, more thrivable conditions in the world. It's about opening people's hearts, our hearts and our imaginations, and ultimately making more possible, more aliveness and more thriving. So here are the 5 steps that we've noticed in using words to open up new possibilities. It starts with noticing the words we're already using and really developing an attunement to the metaphors that we use. The second step is then offering a reframing that's grounded in life, in the organic, in the biological, and then inviting people to engage with it. This is an important step. Circling, and then noticing what are the actions that flow naturally from the conversation, and then circling back to highlight the value of the process of reflection and reframing itself. So this is what we're going to go through, these 5 steps. And if we start with step 1, noticing the dominant metaphors in Western society, in non-Indigenous language, and especially in the context of business, we see most of all the language of machines, of physics, of building and forcing things, and of war, of battle. So here are some examples. The well-oiled machine, we know well, driving change, dashboards and performance indicators, seeing people as human resources or talent to be managed as if they're just commodities alongside other resources to be put into the machine. The focus on metrics and milestones, this a linear orientation, as if this is a straight line progression that we're making and building, accelerating, scaling, extracting growth as the only reasonable goal, and endless growth at that. And then the metaphor of war is also present. Natalia, what would you offer?
I would say it's 400, 500 years of different philosophical, scientific, and industrial um, currents that have built this paradigm we live in, and that's why we use the words we use, and it's been really useful for us. But also, it limits us in what can become possible. And I wonder if perhaps you imagine, speaking of yourself as a well-oiled machine or your team as a well-oiled machine, how does it feel in your body? What do you notice in your body when you use that language? So, so and we'll do a comparison of a bit later, but it's a vocabulary that doesn't take into account our aliveness.
Exactly. So as we focus on fixing the machine and problem solving, on building, on winning in a zero-sum game, these metaphors, this language isn't wrong, but it's often limited. It's limited in its assumption of linearity, of simplicity, of control and predictability. It's limited in being incremental. If we are solving a problem, we're working with what is now, not with what could be, and we're improving on that existing situation incrementally. And it can be stressful. I don't know about you. When Natalia is asking, how do you feel in your body? What my experience is that this metaphor keeps us in cortisol and adrenaline. It keeps us in a stress mode. And there's value in that at times, but it's difficult to maintain. So we don't reject this, but we recognize the limitations of it. And I'll give you an example from an organization in New Zealand that I've worked with. I work with tourism organizations around the world, and um, all of them call themselves destination management organizations. This is a network that exists in every country and every region. These are generally government funded to support the tourism industry in that area. So they see their role as managing the tourist destination, as if something as complex as your home, as your community, as the place where you live with all of its people and history could be managed like a production line. And a production line that is only seeing the tourist. And the goal is to get as many people through as possible, as quickly as possible, and shake as much money loose from their pockets as we can. This is the machine. And this tourist organization, the destination management organization, reached out to me because they had publicly announced that they wanted to do regenerative tourism. They were the first in the world, they were well celebrated, and they quickly realized they didn't know what that meant and what that involved, but they had a strategy. This was their strategy: get organized, lay the foundations, build momentum, and then accelerate. And I imagine you can see the physics, the language of physics in this, and the linearity of it, and the predictability of it, and the stress of it. But this could be any organization. This is absolutely the standard. And the key question for them was, but how will we measure it? This is the mechanistic story's most critical question. And it's the most critical question for their work generally, even before announcing their intention to be regenerative. And we calculated that 50% of their time was spent writing reports to prove that they could measure their value. 50% of their time. And they knew that it was a farce, that there was no way they could actually measure a direct line from what they did to how the tourist destination had some new activity, that there were more beds in heads, sorry, heads in beds, more heads in beds, more tourists coming through because of some specific thing that they did. So there's an example of the mechanistic metaphors guiding what we do and what we can see. Step two is to offer a life-aligned reframing. Instead of where are we going with this? What are we growing with this? Instead of building the foundation, preparing the soil, preparing the ground, instead of scaling up, propagating, instead of driving change, stewarding change, cultivating change, or even going so far as stewarding life's ability to thrive. Isn't that really what it's about? There's an endless list that's possible. And again, it's not to say the dominant metaphors are wrong. We don't even have to go that kind of aggressively against them, but just to gently offer another way and see what comes into view. And within that, it's even more than just switching one word for another. It's expanding the lens beyond just what exists now, beyond the problems that we have now, to the potential, to the life that is within the system. So asking bigger questions. What is ripe here? Where do we have energy? Where is there aliveness? What wants to come to life here? You have to find your own language, the comfort that you have in particular ways of asking questions like these. But the important thing is to look beyond the incremental and the problem solving alone, turn to potential, knowing that you can come back and solve the problems, but within that bigger frame of potential. So in the case of the tourist organization, my gentle invitation to them was, what if you saw yourselves not as managing a tourist destination, but as cultivating the hosting community? What would that change? What would that bring for you? What if it wasn't just a production line, but a whole ecosystem that includes not only the tourists, not only the residents even, but the entire ecosystem, the more than human ecosystem, the history and the future as well. And what if instead of this language of physics, what if we see your strategy as preparing the ground, planting the seeds, tending the garden, gathering the harvest? How does that make you feel? And what more does that bring into view? What new possibilities can you see? And maybe it's not a line. Maybe it becomes a spiral. Maybe where you are is exactly the right place. The resources you've worked so hard to gather around you stay with you instead of running ahead and to some other place. And maybe we start to see the circularity, the cyclical nature that we come back around with our harvest to plant new seeds, to prepare the ground in new ways, to compost what no longer serves us. And instead of asking only how will we measure it, what if we expand the lens to ask how will we know? How will we know that we are contributing to life's ability to thrive, that we are cultivating this hosting community? It includes things that we can measure, but it includes more. It might include how we feel. It might include the quality of our conversations. It might include the quality and nature of the stories that we share and how well we host each other, how deeply we're hosted by this land. And then, crucially, step three is invite other people to engage with it. It doesn't really matter if you are so clever with your questions, if I am so clever with my reframing, unless people take it in and play with it and discover new possibilities for themselves. So we have to be quiet for a moment and ask, what does this mean for you? What does it bring up? What does it bring into view? What new insights? What else seems possible? And why does it matter? So our work with this language is to create the conditions for this new field of possibility to emerge. And then we tend that field, right?
It's not an easy job to stop being the provider of answers and solutions and start stewarding a group and seeing what emerges and playing with that emergence and that intelligence from the system. So it takes a shift in you, But it also removes a bit of the responsibility and opens up new possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So this is about growing the system's capacity to see itself more fully, to see more possibility through conversations like this one. So with the tourist group, I brought them the metaphor of soil. If we're cultivating the hosting community, what can we learn from how soil works? We know from regenerative approaches to agriculture what it takes to regenerate the living soil. So, what can we learn there? And when I offered this question, there was a moment of silence. And then one person leaned forward and she said, "Our soil is depleted." And everybody kind of sighed. And it was an amazing moment. This was something that hadn't been spoken. There was no opportunity to speak it. There was just no forum for saying this. But it turned out that just before the pandemic, there was a volcano eruption in their community, and several tourists died. Many more were horribly injured. And this little group had to deal with that. They were completely unprepared, untrained, and it was incredibly traumatic for them. And then the pandemic hit. And none of that had ever been talked about or cared for. And then they were working on the burnout of spending 50% of their time writing reports that were completely meaningless to them. So their soil was depleted. And being able to name that and having a way to talk about it through this metaphor was so healing in itself. It was so helpful to them and opened up new possibilities for action. I shared a story to help them explore this bigger question: how will we know? It's a story of a wastewater treatment plant. This is a story my colleague Bill Reed tells, that in developing the new wastewater treatment plant off of the coast, or at the coast of Vancouver, it was a project that had regenerative intention. And so the community was brought together to ask this question: how will we know when this wastewater treatment plant is a success, that it has contributed to regeneration of this community? And the answer that came from the community is that it will be a success when the salmon have come back to these waters. And that was a powerful moment in that community. And when I shared that with this tourism group, again, there was a silent moment, and someone leaned forward and said, "What is our salmon? What is our salmon?" And surely it's more than what we're measuring right now, more than what we put into these reports, more than more heads in beds. And we didn't have an answer in that meeting. The point wasn't to get to the answer. The point was to expand the lens, to expand the scope of what they were paying attention to, what they were feeling responsible to care for, what was meaningful to them. So then step 4 is to identify the actions that are obvious, that want to happen because of these things that we can now see, that we can't unsee. What do we want to do? What is the obvious next native step because of who we are here in this place and what we now see? So in their case, lots of things came from this process. These are just a few. We did a retreat to take a pause at a beautiful place and take care of them as humans, and allow them to take care of each other, to help them understand this new role of hosting the ecosystem. So they had to come to understand that ecosystem better, that community that they are cultivating, and what it meant for them in their role. The board needed to shift its approach from micromanaging, as if it could be predicted and controlled and measured at every step, to let go of some of those reports or to shift to a more narrative nature for some of them. a more conversational and interactive nature. And the board had to find more humility. We talked about the humus in the soil, and actually that the board could serve as cover crops, most of all to protect and nourish that living system that is this organization. We introduced a process to improve the flow of their operations because that was part of what was burning them out. They needed to be more efficient and effective. That is still part of the work of regeneration. And we initiated a stewardship council to bring the community together as part of cultivating the hosting community. So the final step is to circle back because there's the risk that people think either you were just really smart, that's nice, or that they were really smart, that's even better, but that it was a one-time thing instead of a practice. So it's important to circle back and help people reflect on what this process brought to them, what they noticed about how they felt about the experience, so that it becomes part of their practice as well. All right, so these are the 5. Notice what metaphors are commonly in use, develop an attunement to when they come up, and I hope that now you will see they are constant. They are so all pervasive, we don't notice them, but it's important to start to notice them so that you can be curious and come with your gentle invitation into a new lens, a new reframing, and then invite people to take it in for themselves, to think about what actions they want to take, and to notice where there was value in this process, in these steps. Perfect. It's a nice segue to being clear. This is not a magic. There is magic. There's lots of magic, but it's not simple. It's not a quick fix. It's not a shortcut. It opens up the door into a broader collection of practices. Most of all, it's helping us embrace new ways of seeing, to see that we are not only machines. We are not only warring people. We are also living ecologies. And it helps us, this shift in language helps us embrace the role that goes with that, the role of steward. And there's a whole practice area here, a whole lifetime of practice to deepen in wisdom and compassion as a steward of our own lives, of the life that we form together with others in projects, in organizations, in communities. There's a whole lifetime of practice in new ways of interacting, new, more life-aligned methods. There's so much available, including having a webinar, a workshop like this, where we do breakouts and we open up to conversation. This is a way of interacting that we might not have done if this were done with a mechanistic mindset, where we deliver a knowledge artifact to you. and that's the simple thing. So we also need to expand what our contribution is. And this is a practice as well, to see, as you did, Anna, maybe it's not only about as many people coming to the ski resort as possible and getting as much of their money as possible. Maybe there's a bigger way that we can serve. Maybe there's more potential in this system. And therefore, there are new ways that we may act together with more agility, with more responsiveness. There's a saying that we do things that are good enough for now and safe enough to try, in service of learning and of growing system capacity. And Ritu, here it comes to you, and new ways of evaluating, asking the bigger question of how will we know, and inviting more of the system in to decide what matters, what we should be paying attention to, and inviting more of the system to do that monitoring and to respond to what we notice. Dedicating resources, time, attention to learning, to explicitly cultivating a learning ecology. And all of that, not as a linear progression, but as a spiral. This is the comprehensive way that we think of the practice of regeneration, the practice of thrivability. And shifting our language and these 5 steps really inform all of it. but we might say it's kind of a most important as a way in, or most useful as a way in. And so we have to mention that, and we're excited to mention that we are offering a course starting November 6th. It's right around the corner. It's a workshop series, a whole lot like this, but it's 9 sessions, and they are each 2 hours each. And we work through that spiral of practices. There's a beginning and an end, and sort of arriving together, and an integration and conclusion. And in the middle is those 7 practice areas.
I think, Michelle, that what you're offering, it's more than a mini workshop today and the course. It's you're gonna create a community of practice. You already did. So we learn from each other already. Look at that angle because it brings value to everybody.
Thank you. I love that. Even if you hadn't been able to talk to each other, to know, look at all these faces, all of these
Yeah.
people who care, who want to find a way to make life more able to thrive. It's so encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did we do it? I think we did it. All
Another
right.
time.
Thank you, everyone. You're welcome to unmute and say goodbye if you'd like.
Yeah.
Wonderful to see you all.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, and bye.
Take care.
Bye.